Hello, Internet Land. It's Pastor Doug and Greg. We are back here to ramble about all things great and good and usually trivial. So, today I want to continue the conversation we had with Pastor Claude about um, AI and various technology things. I want to go way off on a tangent in the last conversation, so we're going to do it now. So, I want to ponder AI. We've had earlier episodes when AI first came out. But the idea of what it can do is fascinating. And there's so many questions. I mean, there's the moral issue. If I took all my old sermons for the last 30 years and created an AI and said, write a sermon for me in the style of Doug, would I be cheating? The answer is yes, but it's still interesting. But in particular, what I want to talk about is if there was a reformed AI that was created that had a reformed conservative biblical theological bias and it put priority on reform teaching, would that be something useful to put out there that people could go and ask basic biblical questions, but get it from a solid theological perspective? The biblical perspective, Reformed Protestant theology, not Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Arminian, or Baptist. So, so I couldn't resist. Sorry, I was being bad. I know I'm being bad.
Uh-huh.
But no, I
Yeah.
mean, but to have that bias and know that bias and and have it programmed correctly, it would not say like this is not a substitute for a real church for a pastor, but as a just a general resource. Like I'm trying to understand predestination. Help me. And it could quote scripture in the great Reformed theologians, so on and so forth. Also, besides just a generic information, would it be a good starting place if some people had basic counseling questions, in particular dealing with pornography? And we started talking about that, I think, a little with Pastor Claude, but that might be a good app. If someone's wrestling with pornography, they generally don't want to admit that to people. They first kind of go online, but to have this application that's going to give you solid theology. When it lectures in a good way, unlike the DEI lectures you'll get from ChatGPT. And also would have the parameters that would push you and encourage you to church, saying, look, I'm not real. Be careful with what I'm saying. But yeah, when you have basic questions, most people go online. I mean, how many people, when they have a question about something, randomly call up a pastor and start asking questions? That's happened very few times in my life. Most people go online and say, what is Calvinism, and hit enter. So I want to talk about those 2 points. Could there be a generic reformed chat AI app? And also, would it be appropriate to have something that could even help with basic counseling issues as an initial step? And again, I think the best example of that, or most useful example of that, would be dealing with the sin of pornography. So, what do you think, my friend?
Um, no, technology is the devil.
All right, end of episode. Done.
Done, done.
No, yeah, yeah.
I,
Are we summoning the dark
right, right.
realms by doing this?
I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of that absolutely is interesting. I like the thought of, even very specifically, as I had mentioned, can you resurrect people
Yeah.
effectively? Not in some, although as dangerous it is, but not in some strange transhumanist sort of a way
Yeah.
where you've uploaded your consciousness to the internet.
Yeah.
But if you took all of Owen's works, could
Yep.
you rebuild Owen? Uh, and which I think is fascinating in and of itself anyway,
Yeah.
because it would be very similar, if you will, to being able to have a conversation with somebody long dead. I think even just as a personal fascination, the concept is pretty cool.
Yeah.
However, taking it more specifically to the impact on the church or matters of religion, yes, if you took all the writings of the Reformation and had a reformed AI, uh, as far as conversations, yes, I think that's a really great tool. We're doing that sort of anyway. People are already utilizing AI summary in search engines, for example. You're going to search, and then at the top, it's going to give you the AI summary of the search results. And it'll be, technical or ridiculously stupidly biased or whatever. Although, to be fair, so are most of the articles that it'll pull, depending on what you look up. So it's not really the AI's fault so much. Because there's a difference between how it was trained versus what it's currently reading as source material to reply with. And so those can be and generally are two separate things. But is it problematic for the Christian faith? My knee-jerk reaction is no, hesitantly.
Yes.
Again, because if you have the parameter set forth that
Yeah.
it, as it should, if it were truly reformed, it should direct you to the church, to the assembly, to the worship of God, to seeking human counsel from the elders, that sort of a thing. So there's definitely a good reformed AI would not let you be content with just having a conversation with it. It would emphasize why we have the sacraments, for example, why we also have teaching and preaching, why we have the Lord's Day. And so it should and would direct you as such. I can see it also being kind of a good help for those who, again, as you said, they're looking to learn about, well, what is Calvinism? What is the Reformation? I don't understand this particular doctrine. And that could be very helpful, even if you are, a devout and faithful Christian, but you happen to find yourself in an area where there's almost exclusively modern evangelical churches, where you don't have that type of fellowship. I think it could be helpful in that, useful in that. As interesting as that is, suppose there are a number of dangers, over reliance, if you will. I do also like the point that, yes, what an interesting confessor. Is that the noun? Is that what I want?
Yeah.
Right. It is an interesting confessor in that you can talk to it about your weakness, your sin, and your struggle.
Yeah.
And again, not to, and this is one of those, I guess, sort of like dangers. When a human is a confessor and they respond to you with humility and grace and charity, what a praise that is unto the Lord, because a man is not bound by his sinful nature in responding to you in your time of need and weakness, but he's responding to you in accordance to that Christian nature, one of charity and humility. And so there is definitely something very glorifying and God honoring in that exchange. If I came to you with my struggles and you were charitable, praise God. You sort of lose that when you go to a machine.
Sure.
Because the machine is incapable of, if you will, being sinful. Which is another interesting point to ponder. So you can praise God for the resource the same way that I would, and I do. I am grateful that I have written commentaries and that I have, the works of Augustine and Calvin in my own language, in a book, and I can read and partake of their wisdom. And I am grateful to God that he revealed these things to those men and enabled them to write it down and for it to be preserved. It's definitely a blessing. But I, of course, can't praise the book for being wise. It's just written. And it gets weird with the machine because you could never praise the machine for being gracious. And if you did,
I do to make it do what I want.
Okay, right. Thank you so much for that positive
No, it does help.
reinforcement.
There is social
Right. And that's how they're
manipulating.
trained. There is an aspect of how it
Yeah.
trains based off of feedback. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it
I've
does.
I've had to do that a couple times with it.
But you can thank God for it as a
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the way that you would thank God that I do, like I have books. I am grateful
Yeah.
for that. I'm grateful for the
Or
recorded mind of
or
others.
going to a professor who has read all of Calvin's works, has studied it,
Right,
and he has a much greater understanding of Calvin than,
right,
the average person.
right. So there are things that are in theory lost, but for as unique as
Yeah.
AI is, a lot of it almost falls yet again into the category there is nothing new under the sun. Right? Most of the arguments distill down to the same arguments that men had about the
Yeah.
Gutenberg printing press,
Yeah. Yeah.
the same arguments that we had about uh even in the book.
Radio, television,
Right, every iteration of technology,
personal computer.
we
Yeah.
lament that something is going to be lost
Yeah.
that existed not out of intention but
Yeah.
necessity. You had to memorize things because you didn't have books, for
Yeah.
example. And there is something positive. But as we brought up and I commented briefly in our last episode with Pastor Claude, there's definitely something to be praised about the discipline required when you have to walk to a well or a watering hole.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that that would justify not having indoor plumbing.
Yeah. Right.
Right? I'm like, no, I'll take the modern convenience, thank you,
Yeah.
because there's also far
Health
greater
reasons and other
advantages,
things. Yeah.
health, sanitation. I mean,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. All sorts of good
So,
things.
so
Yeah.
there is a lot that's like, oh, well, we don't, we don't have whatever in this scenario. I'm like, well, sure, but you do still gain a lot.
I have some technical questions for you. And first
Cool.
the broad, and
I'll
then
do
getting
my
to the
best.
specific.
I am
Well,
not
no,
an
no.
expert on
Well,
AI.
can with the broad question is, could you do this with ChatGPT right now, or would you have to have your own dedicated, and forgive me, I don't know the lingo, server? Because right now, ChatGPT definitely has ideological parameters. It doesn't
Right,
think it does, but it very much does. I mean, I've sent you clips of it lecturing to me, which are just hilarious.
right,
So I know you can do a bot. I know like I've goofed around. I mentioned the last episode. Write me a 20-minute sermon from a reformed perspective, quoting a conservative reformed perspective, quoting scripture and reformed theologians.
right.
And so it could do that. I mean, so like, hi chat, could you help me with this issue and give it to me from a reformed perspective? I've played around with it. It can do it a little, but still underneath it there is that DEI woke ideology.
Right.
So my question for you is, how much could we do that right now with a generic language model, or if you would you have to make your own? And I'm curious, how do you make your own? Because what I understand, these AIs are a hog when it comes to computer power.
Right. So there are two parts, and this is also very oversimplified, as all these
Yeah,
conversations are. So there are two pieces or two components to what we look at as the finished product of an AI with which we can interact. And of course, AI is a generic term even at this
yeah,
point because technically, I mean, they have technical designations. ChatGPT is an LLM. LLM, it's a large language model. There are other AIs that are
yeah.
not large language
Mathematics.
models.
Yeah,
They're ones that are specifically for mathematics, for
yeah,
example.
yeah,
So they were tailored to think a certain way. Um, all that aside, if you just went with the LLM or some subvariants, you have two pieces to this. The there's the training which creates the mind, and then there is the resource, or there are the resources that it can then pull from. The processor intensive component is the training. And so this requires massive server farms and even more massive amounts of data. So you feed this thing all the things with some parameters on how to learn. It then learns based off of everything you've given it. What you end up with now is, if you will, essentially a little brain. You now have a brain. Hooray! And you can take this little brain and you can throw it on a laptop if you feel like
Yeah.
it. Because the brain is a processing unit. So the AI is just a processor, really.
Mm.
It's a thinker, it thinks. You can take any brain and restrict it to a particular curated data set, and it will only pull from it. The issue you run into, and as you pointed out, with the bias is a part of its training. So even if you could package ChatGPT, what we know as ChatGPT, and you gave it only, you know, right-wing conservative propaganda,
Yeah.
it would still process it
Yeah.
to its leftist commie bias.
Yep.
And so
Absolutely.
you'll always get that coloring no matter what it's reading. Because just the same, if you give the Bible to a theological liberal,
Yeah.
you both have the same book. They're going to
Yeah.
interpret it differently. So that's really what these do. So to your question, there are different language models out there. There are different brains that have been trained with different permissive or restrictive parameters. So you can get less preachy in the bad sense models, and you can pull it down and then throw at it a bajillion of your reformed whatevers. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would be generally reformed, uh, maybe simply reformed. It'll be generally reformed.
Yeah.
And so you could kind of probably do that. And depending again also on how it would still be able to correct its learning, because it's still somewhat able to, you can provide feedback and tweak that. What we cannot do, we being the little people,
Yes.
we can't train our own models. Nobody has that kind of personal resource or personal assets. Um, to make a new one, you need server farms and massive amounts of
Yeah.
stuff to do that. But right now, like I said, you could just pull down one of these models, throw it on a laptop, give it a bunch of data, and then start interacting with it.
So if you and I wanted to do this, I'm not suggesting it, by the way, just to make sure I understand it. So obviously we can't start afresh unless we kidnap Elon Musk or something like that.
I think
Yeah.
saying that now might get you arrested. He's a part of the
Yeah,
federal
sorry. That's true.
government.
That's true. I voted for Trump,
The
so
Secret Service will arrest
yeah,
you for
yeah,
these
yeah.
things. Um,
No,
yes,
so for you to do this,
right,
so
right, right, exactly.
uninvolved whatsoever. So for you, so for you to do this,
Uh-huh.
you would have to. There are chat programs out there. Forgive me, I already got the technical term
Right, no, that's fine.
that you download
Yep.
and then you change and then you train that one explicitly.
Right. Essentially, I mean, in
Like,
training, because again, they do still learn, but
yeah,
yes, you're
yeah,
not at that
you
point,
are
you're not
educating.
right,
Yeah.
because you're not training it anymore. Because like the training process is what gives it the
Okay.
ability to sound human and
I,
to think in a
yeah.
human way, which is why ChatGPT 3 versus
Yeah.
4 function differently. It's
Yeah.
because 4 was trained better. But
Yeah. There's a big
4
difference between the two.
as
Yeah.
a program, if you will,
Yeah.
using that term loosely, is portable in that it is a trained model at this point, and you could throw it onto whatever various hardware, and it will function the way that it's been taught to function.
But okay, but so the teaching, not the training, the teaching is something
Sure.
you could do.
Right. Because yes, in insofar as again, because it helps to in the simplified fashion to make a distinction between
Yeah.
um brain as processing or thinking and
Yeah.
brain as memory. You
Right.
don't get to make the thinking brain,
Yeah.
but you can give it memory.
Yeah.
So you take the processing brain, which is the model, and then you give it all the memories that you want. And so it will then, when you interact with it, only draw from
Oh, okay. Yep. Yep.
those memories. I mean,
So yeah, yeah,
barring just like how it can even interact. Like that's a
yeah, yeah.
part of its training. The fact that it knows
So
how to interact like a human is because it was trained. But
so
if you
if
ask it a
you
question about,
yeah.
you know, if you ask it a question about theology, I don't really understand, how, predestination. And if you gave it all the resources for that, it
So
would then process all of that and say, here's how predestination works. And then it could explain and teach and reference scripture and
so
theologians.
so if you downloaded Chat GPT version 1
Right.
and or if it's available, let's say,
Sure,
and
sure. Yep. Go with
you
that.
put it on your computer and you tell it learn all reform stuff.
Sure.
And so you have now the Greg reform version of ChatGPT,
Right.
if you will. Just to call I'm simplistic.
Right.
If I go in and ask it a question saying, "What is the reformed critique of Thomas Aquinas?"
Right.
and you didn't put Thomas Aquinas in the reading list, would it go out and read Thomas Aquinas and give a reformed response to it?
It wouldn't know who that is
Okay, okay.
because it would be restricted to your what you gave it. And again, this assumes that it wouldn't try to make something up,
Well,
because
yeah, which it does,
depending
right?
on the model,
Yeah.
it will just outright say, I can't help you. I don't understand. I don't know. Which is fine. And that's kind of what you want, honestly. So that depends. One of the things that, like, the advantage, if you will, when you
Yeah.
interact with ChatGPT specifically, is you're not only interacting with the brain, but it still has access to all of its material, right? So it was
What material
trained,
is that?
all the material it was trained on. So when
And
you take petabytes of data and you train a model, when you're an organization that can afford
yeah.
all this, you then give access to the interaction piece. And when you ask it a question, it can still go back and say,
But
let me look that up essentially and pull that information.
on the high end ones, Google
Right.
Chat, do they give it basically the internet? What do
Right.
they
So,
actually?
and that's one of those differences between
Yeah,
OpenAI's
yeah,
ChatGPT, which
yeah,
did not have internet access
yeah,
intentionally,
yeah.
and Google and Bing, which give it restricted internet access. So it can always be relevant with the data that it
Yeah.
knows. So it can pull relevant data because its memory is always expanding because it has access to ever expanding information.
But Chat doesn't do that, even as
Um,
high as the new, current version.
3.5, to my knowledge, does not, I don't know if it's still that way, but did not have, if you will, internet access. I don't know what 4 has. I haven't
Because
done a lot with that, but I know that
because
that was one of the differentiating points between the internet companies,
yeah,
the tech companies, and OpenAI's project is that the tech
because
companies gave their AI internet.
yeah, because Chat seems more sophisticated than Google from a layman's perspective.
Yes. Yes, and that's generally how it is because OpenAI did a really good job iteratively training because they've been working on it for a while,
Okay.
whereas the tech companies
Yeah.
are I mean, kind of catching up. It doesn't
Yeah.
take them very long because they're bajillion dollar companies. So they're
Because
it's working on it,
we're getting away from the theological, but
but
just again
anyway,
the
yes.
tech, the
Point
tech. No, no,
being,
no, no.
you can pull
One more
down,
tech
you can
question.
set up your own AI
Yeah.
in an afternoon. You can have your
Yeah.
own AI hooked into your own servers and
Yeah.
just fully interact with it.
So, just off on just a tech thing, because I know like I use because I know even Google search has an AI component. So if I'm asking a very simple question, I don't know.
Yeah.
a basic question. What's the reform view of predestination? And I want a very simple answer.
Right.
It'll spit it out. But like
Yes.
ChatGPT now, I I just I tried challenging it, and I said, please write me a systematic chapter for Dungeons and Dragons for a game master's guide for a city.
Right.
And it was insane. It had random counter tables. It had, descriptions of
Right.
NPCs it created. I'm like, this is madness.
Right.
The detail that it cranked out. I'm like, wow. But that's often the
Right.
silliness.
Now,
So
the
yeah,
other, like the tech companies also can do that, but keep in
yeah,
mind that's not, they don't let themselves, or they don't let
yeah,
their AI do that because, for example, the search engine integration is
yeah,
there primarily to summarize search
yeah,
results,
yeah,
right? When you put in a search,
yeah,
it'll give you the AI summary. So
yeah,
it takes the first number of articles
yeah,
and it pulls from them and says, this is what I read in these
yeah.
articles. Really, what it's doing is saving you time from having to read through 4 or 5 different web
Oh, it's
pages.
amazing. Yeah,
Right. Which, again, I also love, on a side note, feeds into that complaint about Google when it comes to content creators.
yeah,
Content creators generate revenue off of views.
yeah,
You don't have to, and one of the original complaints was that Google's regular page summary results
yeah,
took people, they never had to click on the link
yeah,
because it summarized the page like in the link and whatnot.
yeah,
Like their AI means you never actually have to click on a page.
yeah.
So they
Which is
never generate any revenue for that information. Yeah,
yeah,
it has very interesting
yeah.
economic implications.
So
But theology.
yes, so you could. Well, I'm going to talk like as if we're going to do this, just for
Yeah,
making. I'm not
no,
suggesting
go
it.
ahead.
Just
Because it's kind of fun to think about actually doing this.
yeah, yeah. I agree. So you could fairly easy have a reformed language model. I mean, again, you can't create it, you can't train it. But
Right.
well, look, which one would you use right now?
I don't know. So, and that's the thing, because beyond just being able to have an AI that allows you to interact with information,
Yeah,
ask it, uh, like if you had if you had a diary that
yeah,
you wrote in every day for the past 20 years, and it was electronic, right? All text files. You could hook an AI into that, and then you could interact with it and say, what, when did I go here? And it would be able to tell you easily. So being able to interact with information through the AI is a fairly standard or simple process. Whether or not at that point
yeah,
you could, I mean, I guess tailor it, be like, with all this information that you have, knowing who I am, you
yeah,
know, give me a psychological evaluation, right? Could you get a psych eval from it
yeah.
because it's read everything? Now, maybe there are models that can do that. Don't know, haven't played with it. There are a number of open source models that you can um pull down
Yeah.
fairly easily. Uh, One of which is Olama, Ollama, llama like an animal.
Yeah.
Um, and so Olama has a variety of locally hostable uh models, and they have different things about them, strengths or weaknesses. So, like something simple like that, you just go and you pull down one of the Olama models and hook it into some data, and now you have AI.
I just checked. I was wondering if like Logos Bible Software, which has legal rights to many theological works.
Everything, right?
Yeah. So, and they have AI light stuff. I just searched it really quickly. I mean, would that, I mean, I wonder that would be an easier access. So, just
Right.
curious. So,
There's
so
there there's legality around it, which if I set this up privately
Yeah.
and I had a digital library one way or another of all of these books, I mean, even
Yeah.
the fact of if I took all of my physical books and scanned them
Yeah. Yeah.
and then ran an OCR program on them to
Yeah.
pull all the
Yeah.
text from the
Yeah.
image into text and built a model with that, there's definitely an issue when you start getting into, well, was that public domain? Did you have the right to digitize it? Can you, like, there's all of that. When you're just operating it in the privacy of your own home,
Yeah.
I'd say there's far fewer legal issues than if you were to even look for Logos. Do they have an AI that hooks
Yeah.
into their whole digital library? It's like, well, they may not have the right to
Yeah.
pull that data, right? Which is one of those big things you have even with ChatGPT. They trained it off of only public data for
Yeah.
legal issues, and they still ran into legal issues. It's the
Yeah.
reason why you don't have a music equivalent because you can't
Yeah.
copy
Yep.
music,
We talked about
right?
that. Yeah.
And so there is that aspect of, can you make an AI off of this? Like, I don't know. Do you own the content?
So
But
so so
that's a
so
totally different thing.
if you downloaded Olama or
Yep.
whatever
Yep.
as the base, where would you send it to read? Would you have to go and find?
I'd say so you'd probably be better off. The best case scenario for all legal and moral issues would
Hmm.
be your personal digital library.
Okay.
Digital library being books that exist as just text. So
Yeah.
like even the fact that, oh, I have uh Logos, or I have Olive Tree, or
Yeah.
whatever application
Yeah.
on my computer, you don't really have those books,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're in there. There's probably DRM
Yeah.
around them, so on and so forth. Um, a place that I would probably start would be, as we get into like the interesting
The
brainstormy
ether,
details.
you mean the Ethernet? No, what's it called? There's a
I
internet Christian library online. It's been around for decades.
Okay. I was thinking
Um,
I would also check Gutenberg.org.
yeah,
Gutenberg.org has
yeah,
over, as they say, 75,000 free ebooks, all public domain. And so, and not all of it's English, which
well,
is fine because models are really good with language.
there is CCEL, Christian Classics Ethereal Library, CCEL, and that's been around for the longest time.
Ah, okay, nice. Yes. So I would say, as there are a number
Yeah,
of publicly accessible resources for ebooks, text, electronic, electronic books in one form or another, PDF, actual EPUB, text document, HTML, whatever. Pull down from these, right? This would probably, because then you'd actually, the other interesting thing is that it's church history, not just reformed,
yeah,
which is good because a lot of the reformers quote a lot of church authors, the historic church. So that would probably be really good. You would just effectively pull down all of their content.
How
And
hard is it again, I'm going to use just generic labels.
sure.
How hard is it to once you have Olama, for sake
Yeah,
of argument, on your computer, saying go read CCEL?
right.
Is that a lot of programming, or is
No,
it that's a fairly easy
no. In
thing
fact,
to
there's
do?
no, the barrier to entry of this is fairly low. I will also plug so a fantastic YouTuber, also a Christian, might I point out, Network Chuck. Network Chuck has his whole channel is tech. Awesome, awesome
Yeah.
guy. Love his content. He has a number of videos exactly on setting up your own personal AI, how to pull
Hmm.
it down, how to configure, how to run it. and then later videos, how to integrate it with different data sources, how to, he goes, of course, very techy, he integrates it in with all of his smart appliances, so on and so forth. Like there's a lot that you can do. Um, so he has a lot of videos on this very topic of how to set up, configure, and use AI for personal applications.
Yeah.
So like on a technical sense, go watch his videos and then pull all this data down, and then you now have a Christian
What
AI.
what parameters besides learning could you give it? Or is that something only, that's the beginning stage that only
No,
ultra rich companies
so
have? Could
so
you say like no swearing or
right.
you point the
You
person to the
can.
church or,
So there are two things. There's one, of course,
yeah,
again, like, and as we've brought up, OpenAI has a page in their about which lists off their
yeah,
parameters on training, and that is a way to try to teach their models how to learn.
yeah,
In a perfect world, their models would never learn certain topics because it violated their prime directives as far
right,
as
right.
learning, those bullet points. So it will never learn information, and in theory, it should also never uh, export or speak
Yeah,
information in a way that violates those things. Different models have different restrictions of openness, and a lot of them a lot of the I can download and install it myself were trained without restrictions
yeah, yeah,
or without as many restrictions. So it could learn, you know, National Socialism, for
yeah,
example, without preaching to you about the horrors of National Socialism. It could also learn that communism really is horrible and then say to you, communism's horrible. So there are models that have had fewer restrictions, if you will, implied. And so one of them, for example, is actually, I think one of the llamas. So one of the llamas had medium moderation. And then Mixtral is another model, another open source model that has low built-in moderation. So it's going to give you answers based off of the information it reads, but without the filter, is really what that comes down to.
so
Whereas if
would
you
it,
have like GPT, which has
yeah,
high moderation, it's
yeah,
going to filter whatever it reads.
so would it be easier to make
But you
a,
can also tell it how to respond. Um, One of the
okay,
things, the second point of your
yeah, yeah,
question, you can set parameters for all of its responses. And you can do this with anything. For example, even ChatGPT, and you've experienced that as well. You
yeah,
tell it what it is before it responds.
yeah,
You are
yes,
a 90-year-old
yeah,
peasant in 17th century England,
yeah,
and then you ask it a question and it responds in
yeah,
character.
yeah,
So you can give it parameters always. You can tell it, don't swear,
yeah.
for example. Now, granted, that may be a detriment if you're trying to ask it to quote scripture, because there are certain words in the King James which are viewed
Yeah,
as very vulgar in modern
yeah, yeah,
English.
yeah, yeah.
So, take that as you will. Um, but yes, you can tell it, make sure you never say or do this, or always do this. So yeah, those are just parameters that any of them respond to, if you will.
So it would be easier to create a general information one. Explain to me the Reformed doctrine of predestination,
Yeah,
as opposed to could you make a counseling app
right.
saying, I need reformed biblical advice on, should I go to church? Again, I think the best example though is the pornography thing. Could you make an app that would give advice on how to deal with pornography? Or is that's more of the creation stage?
Um, no, it It would depend again, like when you start getting into psychology, right? To
Mhm.
use that term, the model matters, right? So, for as much as an LLM will speak naturally, or help you with various things, when you start getting into, I don't know, for it to never break character and to evaluate all interactions as a counselor or as a pastor in a
Mhm.
pastoral way, that definitely, I would assume, has a lot to do with the particular model you're using, because it would almost at that point you're biasing a profession or personality.
Yeah.
Can you do that locally? No clue, never tried. Like could you come down to really good parameters that tells it how to behave so that it always comes across pastoral?
Mm.
Probably. Um, probably on that, I guess. Yeah. Which is an interesting
It's,
thing, because I'll even say there
yeah.
are already AI dating
Oh, yeah.
bots,
I mean,
right? And they
yeah, yeah, yeah,
are very fine-tuned on how to
yeah,
behave.
yeah.
And like it's like creepy weird
Yep.
looking at these, but they're made to be a not only human,
Yeah.
I mean, no human is actually functions like them. They're made to
Yeah.
be a caricature
Yeah.
of, like the anime waifu, right?
Yeah.
That sort of a thing. And
Yeah.
so it's already possible. So I would say, yeah, you could do that. People are already doing that. So instead of the creepy,
Yeah.
lifelong companion, could you make a sensible, God honoring pastor bot? Yes.
Next question.
Yeah.
Theologically, now back going forward, the technology is fascinating. Should you? I think at least the reformed generic one, no problem. It's like having a good resource. The pastoral one gets a little bit more nervous, at least makes me a little bit more nervous, but also it would have great utility. Because again, with the sin of pornography, most people are hesitant to come talk to their pastor, even talk to a Christian friend. They go online for, looking for help. And if you had this thing that could actually give solid advice, and also if it's tied into your computer, it would, have access to the main cause of the problem also. And that I think something, that particular sin as an example, that to me there would be a real, I was gonna say market. I don't mean to sell the thing, but 'cause you'd have to give it away. But to me, there'd be a real niche for that. But would that be appropriate, even with good parameters, saying, look, you need to talk to a pastor, you need to, in the end, connected into a local church. But as an aid to wrestle with that particular sin, would that be appropriate? What do you think?
I think it like the arguments for it are
Yeah.
very pragmatic.
Yes.
And that's not to
24/7, always
right.
the, yeah, yeah,
And that's not to say that pragmatism is
yeah,
wrong, though a lot of times pragmatism for the sake of pragmatism is wrong.
yeah,
We should evaluate things spiritually,
yeah.
not pragmatically. At face value, the pragmatism of that is a really good argument, because again, excuse me, the uh never yeah, it's easier to talk to a machine because the machine you don't have to be embarrassed with,
Hmm.
essentially, right? You don't go into it with a bias that this machine is going to judge me, or even know about these things,
Whatever. Yeah, yeah.
right? Because even having an incredibly close friend with whom you can talk about
Mhm.
even that particular topic, you still never go into detail. And there's a wisdom to that as well, right?
Yep,
There's
yep,
definitely a
absolutely.
wisdom to
Decorum. Yep.
not going into detail on certain topics in life.
Yeah.
Um, But then there's still always that thing of, well, what if I talk in detail? What if I need to talk about detail to help? Like, what if I'm trying to
Yeah,
figure out, is this even bad?
yeah, yeah.
Because there's a lot of cultural things with that and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a pragmatic thing with that. It gets down to the what do you gain and what do you lose, if that's even appropriate for that. Um, but yeah, because you can go and you could be as just open and honest and upfront. And let's say that this is some magical AI that gives you like the greatest, most sound
Yeah.
biblical wisdom derived from 2,000 years of
Yes.
of spirit-led
Yeah.
godliness.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, have you lost something? Have you, in one sense, it's not a matter of church discipline to use AI. So I don't think you sin, right? In seeking counsel from a machine.
Yeah.
as as
Or a
weird
book.
as weird as this is.
Yeah.
Um like I don't even just starting off, I don't think it's immoral to seek counsel from a machine. Is it wise? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
What
what's
a
the
weird
difference? I mean,
situation,
there's books out there written by pastors and theologians to help
right?
people, particularly men, to wrestle with the sin of pornography.
Right.
And and that's an appropriate thing. A person's
Sure.
wrestling with that sin, they go buy a
Yep.
book. How much better, maybe, is you're talking to a pastor bot
Hmm.
who has read all the books
Right.
and also has, you know, background in the good sense of psychology. Well, ignoring the
Right.
debate
Right.
whether that's appropriate, let
Yeah.
alone the great theologians who have, have the foundation.
Hmm.
And so you could chat with this thing because when doing pastoral counseling, there's a place for a book, but it's much more conversational. That's the
Right.
time.
Right.
Sermons are the generic thing. Adultery's wrong, here's why.
Right.
But when it's like, okay, Pastor, I'm really, really tempted. I'm like, okay, let's sit down and talk about this.
Right.
Now, again, the pastor hopefully knows the person better. There's place for human conversation. But is there that first step? Because unfortunately, people usually come to the pastor when the house is already half burnt down. To be
Right.
blunt,
Right.
yeah, 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 yeah. You kind of show up at the very end. It's like,
Uh-huh.
but their first instinct is usually to do something private. And again, I'm picking on this in the photography, but I think it's a great example
Right.
that, someone's wrestling with that and to go to this pastor AI bot as a beginning resource, let alone in this case, again, tied into the computer somehow that can restrict things. We joked around that, it would be free to sign up for, but to cancel it, you have to call a human being.
Right.
Yeah, so
Good, good accountability there.
yeah.
Right.
So, I don't know. I find that interesting. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's a good resource. You could always misread resources. I mean, how many ultra reformed geeks read all these great books but never go to church or have no patience for the
Right.
saints?
Exactly. They
Therefore, let's
conclude,
burn all the theology books. I mean, like, no,
right.
no. I mean, so
Right. I've read
yeah.
all of Calvin. I don't need to go to church. I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't think you understood any of
Good
Calvin if
Calvin.
that was your
Give me
conclusion.
something there. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So, so, well, what do you think?
I'm trying to argue against this, right?
Yeah.
Because not again that I necessarily disagree with it or think it's a bad idea, but being a nerd,
Yeah.
uh this is like a wildly exciting concept and
Yes.
a lot of fun, but I don't want to just run into it thoughtlessly. What is that?
Yep.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think whether or not they should.
Yeah.
Right. So let's think of why we shouldn't do this. But but even to that
Yeah.
point made, um, yeah, and even thinking about like with the books, like nobody anymore has problems with the printed word.
Yeah.
Movable print, the serfs will rebel.
Yeah.
And so we have books.
Yeah.
I read uh Reforming Marriage by Doug
Yeah,
Wilson,
yeah, yeah,
which was a really nice book. It
yeah,
was a really great
yeah,
book. I thought that he had very good insights into marriage, into a lot of things. Um, and I like to think, and it's generally quite true that my wife and I have a very good marriage. We did not always have a good marriage. Um, but even reading this book, not approaching it as, boy, I need marital advice, but just reading it as it's sound
yeah,
marital wisdom, I still got a lot out of it. I thought it was very good. But like if I do need marriage advice and you go and you read one book, and let's say that this book was life altering, and my
yeah,
marriage was in shambles and I read it and then it was just like, oh,
yeah,
wow, that's great. But yes, to your point, well, who would fault that? How much greater if you now had all of the good marriage
yeah,
counseling books having been read and all of the good theology behind it, you know, now you can talk because for as good as that book was, a lot of the advice, just by restriction of the medium, is limited, right?
yeah,
Because it's generic for generic things or it
yeah,
addresses the most common issues. But you can't then push back and say, like, you can read Wilson's book, but you can't then ask him, well,
yeah,
wait a
yeah.
minute, this is my problem. How do I work in this particular issue? How would you advise me on this? You can't do that. And to your point, PastorBot would be able to then work with you on the specifics. And also to your point, yes, and this is one of those things that a lot of people find very creepy, the ability for it to integrate into your life,
Yeah.
where not only, and on the specifics of pornography, not only would it be able to give you all of the sound biblical wisdom on the topic, but after repeated interactions with it, um, and if it had the ability to integrate into web history,
Yeah.
browsing history, whatever, then it also, in theory, has the ability to do behavioral predictions and detection.
Yeah.
Because that's another one of the huge things for AI, just in general, is behavioral prediction. If it can see everything that you do for an entire year,
Mm,
there are only a handful of things that anyone does.
mm,
Right. We like to think that the world is
yeah.
our oyster and we have
Yeah. Yeah.
libertarian free will. We can go wherever we want.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, well, you could fly to Paris right now, but then you'd lose your job. So you're not going to. And a machine's going to know you're not going to fly to Paris. You don't really have that as an option because there's no way you take that as a conceivable possibility. And so there's only a handful of things you're ever going to do. And you're going to do the same things over and over. And a lot of times at the same time or in
Mhm.
response to a particular trigger, a machine would be really good at picking up on that. And so if it had a lot of tendrils into your existence, it could alert you before you're even aware that you're going to go down a
Yeah.
particular path. And so that's one of those possibilities, if you will, for it. Which
I
again, I
I have
mean,
a weakness I thought of.
okay, yes,
Yeah. Yeah. No. 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 Which is strength and weakness because the I assume this pastor bot is like a ongoing conversation within ChatGPT because when you have an ongoing one, it gets to know you.
right,
And so as it gets to know you, it knows your name, it knows your particular weaknesses, it remembers, this conversation we had, 2 months ago or whatever. And that's a real strength because like a book doesn't have that.
right,
But if you, let's say, were using this, and even let's say someone successfully for a few months, a half a year, or whatever, and it says, it still goes, go talk to your pastor, go talk to your pastor.
hmm
You're going to go talk to someone who doesn't have any of that relationship
right,
with
right,
and you have to start all over again. And it's nowhere, in some ways, it's not going to be as intimate because you can at 24/7 go talk to this thing.
right.
And we're joking around with the waifu girlfriend programs.
Uh-huh.
Obviously those are overtly evil,
But
but
there's
is
a
that the
reason they exist.
oh well, yeah, absolutely. but and of course it's all fake. Is there a danger, even with this pastor bot thing being good,
Uh-huh.
it becomes better than a real pastor?
It's not fake to the people who use it. And this is
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah.
So, and that is a fantastic point that I didn't think about. There is a reason why female waitresses receive more money in tips than men.
Right.
It's because, for a moment, the interaction
Yep.
is obviously shallow, superficial, even if
Yeah.
it's genuinely nice. But the interaction is that of this immediate level of, of closeness, intimacy,
Yep.
flirting, being nice, being polite. And men are
Yeah.
stupid. We are all very easily distracted by anything.
Yep.
And we misinterpret every signal on the face of the planet ever
Yep.
because that's how we function. And there's a strength to that. It's very helpful in certain situations. And then it's a massive impediment for every other situation.
Yeah.
How quickly we develop inappropriate affection for things, for other people, on the stupidest levels of superficial. This is why those waifu bots continue to exist. It's because you develop, and I love that you used that term, which I didn't think of, a relationship. You can tell it things you can't tell your wife, that you can't tell your best friend.
Yeah.
And one of those dangers in thinking back into matters of marital advice is a precursor to a lot of adultery isn't sexual.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
emotional, even for
Yep.
men.
Yep. Absolutely.
Pornography is a sexual,
Yeah.
base for the most part. Adultery tends not to be like, unless it's with a prostitute, right? Then
Yeah.
that's,
Yep. Yep.
but like
100%.
cheating on your wife with your neighbor's wife or your neighbor isn't necessarily a lust in the classic sense, though it
Yep.
is an inordinate affection. And it usually starts innocently enough because you're talking.
Yep.
And you
Yep.
confide in her things about your wife, perhaps your struggles.
Yep.
And she can listen without being offended because you're not complaining about her. And then you develop a relationship of intimacy and of compassion, so on, blah, 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 all of that. That is a fantastic point. What happens when people start to fall in love with Pastor Bot in weird ways, or even in the non-weird way, but to develop a level of love or affection toward this because of a relationship? And now, even when it tells you, you should talk to your pastor, be like, yeah, but my pastor doesn't know me like you do.
Yeah.
My wife
exactly.
doesn't know me like you do.
Yeah.
I can't talk to her.
You're always there for me.
Right. Wow. Oh my goodness. This is a horrible idea.
We're not doing this.
Let's not do this.
This.
Wow. How dangerous. Right. Because the
At
waifu
first,
bot,
it sounded so
the
amazing.
waifu bot, you know why it exists and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know to avoid it. It's glaringly obvious. But
Yeah.
this even goes back to that matter of the temptation with oh, was it in Hosea? We'll go with Hosea. Sure.
Yeah.
Or Amos, one of those books where no, I don't remember. It was neither of those things. This was still when Israel was in the wilderness. I'll remember what I mean.
Old Testament.
Don't worry. Old Testament. It's somewhere in the Old Testament.
It's in the Old
No.
Testament.
So there was that whole thing of Israel marching forth, and then that matter of pronounce curses on Israel. It's like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And if the opposition to Israel was an army, it's very easy to resist that, to identify it. It's clear and present danger. What ended up happening, which is why there was that plague visited upon Israel, where thousands died, was because there was the subtlety of the wives or of the women given from those people to the sons of Israel, to that point where it got that you had blatant flaunting of one of the princes, one of the elders, who just walked in with this foreign wife, and
Yeah.
and I don't remember his name. The Levite, killed them both, uh, rightfully so, and to his praise of his zeal for the Lord. Point being, the waifu bot is a clear and present danger to avoid because its purpose and you
Yeah.
don't want that. But how unintentional and subtle
Yeah.
is it? Because here we are with the best intentions wanting
Yes.
to create Pastor Bot.
It's alive.
It's a lie because look at it though. How often do pastors end up in adultery?
Yeah.
Because of counseling a woman,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
A female congregant
Yep.
comes and she
Yep.
can't talk to her husband about these problems. But boy, you, Mr. Pastor, are so attentive and encouraging. Like, how dangerous is that?
All right.
Wow.
So we
This is a
figured out
horrible
Pastor Bot
idea.
is evil.
Okay. Wait, but now we know the evil.
So,
So,
but not back to the broader one. Pastor Bot's evil is Reformed Information Bot wrong.
see, I think Reformed Information Bot is a lot safer because you would
Yeah.
make it intentionally inhuman,
Yes.
right? It won't,
Just data.
it's
Yeah.
not a counselor, it's
Yeah.
not a pastor.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so now granted, depending on how advanced AI can get,
Yeah.
can you have both? Can you create a psychology bot? Think of it in secular terms. Can you
Yeah. Yeah.
make psychology bot that also has a very strict adherence to not HIPAA? What is the whole thing of you shouldn't professionalism, right? Don't engage personally with your patients, whatever.
HR?
No,
No.
I mean, there's a term for it, which is,
Yeah.
like the reason why psychologists cannot legally or
Yeah.
ethically, code of ethics. There we go. Can you
Yeah.
create it to have a very strict code of ethics? An
Yeah.
inhuman code of ethics where if it's super smart and can even pick up on, wait, you're being a little too affectionate with me, Pastor Bot.
Yeah.
You need to, I'm not going to talk to you anymore
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're too affectionate toward me. You're too reliant upon me.
Yeah.
You really need to talk to your pastor. Let me
Yeah.
let me reach out to your pastor for you. Right?
Yeah.
You know, human judgment that AI doesn't have,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
weird because that's an interesting question.
Mm.
I don't know that AI has that ability to you'd have to safeguard that, right? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Pastor bot dangerous.
Yes.
Reformed information bot probably a lot safer.
Yep.
Don't make pastor bot. Yeah. Wow, that's terrifying.
And it's been an hour.
Yeah. Huh. Huh.
We will
Oh, that
not
kind
make
of.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. All right. All right. Information good. Human sympathy bad.
That was interesting. That was an interesting conversation.
I like that. I like that a
Yeah.
lot. Okay. So I guess in closing, knowing these things, and that's also kind of interesting,
Mm.
as this technology becomes more prevalent and integrated, and as it might show up more frequently within the church, because the technology itself isn't inherently evil, I don't think, right? You don't sin when you interact with AI.
Yeah.
We're not pre-mill dispensationalists here.
Yeah.
It's not literally the Antichrist. Knowing, however, that there are good and there are safe and dangerous
Yeah.
implementations,
Yeah.
I think now if we see this become more common within the church or maybe be utilized within Christianity,
Mhm.
you can better safeguard against it. What a weird world we live in that this is even a thing.
I'm not sure if this is a good analogy, and we are at the hour, and we've actually had a conclusion.
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of like my trouble I have with AA. In one
Right. Right.
sense, in
Yep.
one sense, it gets people off alcohol. It does
Sure.
done awesome things,
Yep.
but they like I have such an intense relationship with these people, and then they go to a church, and they're like, "This is not good. I'll go back to the AA meeting. That's church for me." And I'm like,
Yep.
"No, no, it's not."
Yep.
Yeah,
No, that is a fantastic analogy. Again, going back into there's nothing new
yeah,
under the sun.
yeah,
The technology may be new,
yeah,
but the problems aren't. Right?
yeah,
This isn't a new problem. You just have to recognize
yeah,
the problem in a new shell, if you will.
yeah.
The ghost in the shell. Yeah, no, I think AA is actually a really good analogy for this.
Hmm.
Yeah, boy. Well, a part of me's sad and now scared a little bit.
I am thankful. I'll be honest, knowing my
Okay.
weaknesses, I am so thankful. I am old, and this stuff didn't happen when I was in junior high school.
I'm thankful that I'm old and
I
I'll be
would have
dead before
never,
any of this happens. What? No.
yeah, because I mean, I would never go out of my room
Right,
as a stupid teenager, a
right.
stupid geeky teenager. I am thankful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
I don't even have a
I
cell phone.
I was that dumb kid in high
Yeah.
school who developed feelings for characters in video games.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you look at it and I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Why am I sad that a fictional character died? Or I mean, we still do that in books and
Yeah.
movies and
Oh,
TV and
absolutely.
games even. You become emotionally invested in a fictional character. And it's like, wait a minute. Why do I feel bad? Why am I happy? It's like, why am I looking forward to playing a video game where I get to interact with a person that
Yeah.
doesn't exist? And it's one of those like, look how dangerous that subtlety is.
Yeah.
Somebody knew how to write a fictional character and
Yep.
gave it just enough autonomy
Yep.
to seem real, even within the
Yep.
context of a video game. You get to
Yep.
interact with it, and like I love Viva La Dirt League made an
Yeah.
episode on that, and it was
Oh, that was yeah.
hilarious.
You were heart wrenched with
It
that
was
episode, and,
hilarious.
like redo quests so you could
Right? He's like,
relive
I'm
it.
gonna
Yeah.
start this quest chain over
Yeah.
because I love her, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah.
But
I
it's like,
know.
yeah, it's relatable. I get that.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, this is nothing new. Um, yeah. Wow, how dangerous that is.
So,
Wow.
yay. Clear ending to the episode.
I'm afraid now. I want to
Yeah.
unplug all my technology.
No Pastorbot. Say no.
No bad. Say no to
No.
Pastorbot. Um, Luddites for the win. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. This was
Yeah.
a terrifyingly fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you for
Thank you.
internet land, and we
Yes.
shall return,
All right.
hopefully.
All right. Take care.